Picture two people, same age, 22 years old, same starting salary, same city. They even went to the same college. One of them opens a brokerage account the week after graduation, puts in $200, sets it to automatic, forgets about it. The other one waits, has some credit card debt to handle first, then a car payment, then life gets in the way life always does. By 32, by 40, he's telling himself the same thing millions of people say every single day. I'm too far behind. It's too late for me. Here's the uncomfortable part. He's probably wrong, but not for the reasons you think. And the first guy, the one who started early and did everything right, he's also making a mistake. A quiet one, a patient one, the kind that doesn't reveal itself until it's too late to fix. This video is not going to tell you to cut out your morning coffee. It's not going to give you a 5-step plan. There are no affirmations here, no hustle culture pep talks, no fake urgency about limited time offers. What this is an honest look at how money actually grows, what the math really says, what the finance industry wants you to misunderstand, and why the thing you think is your biggest financial problem is probably not the thing you should be focusing on at all. Stick around, because by the end of this, the way you think about money will be slightly different. And in finance, slightly different is everything. Let's start with something you've already heard: compound interest. Einstein supposedly called it the 8th wonder of the world. He almost certainly never said that, but the quote gets repeated anyway, which is fitting, because that's kind of how financial advice works in general. Someone smart sounds like they said something simple, the nuance gets stripped out, and millions of people walk around with a half-truth lodged in their brain like a splinter. So let's talk about what compound interest actually is, not the textbook version, the real version. You put money somewhere, that money earns a return. Then the return itself starts earning a return. Simple enough. $1 becomes $1.10. Then that $1.10 earns on itself. Then you've got $1.21. Not because you added anything, because the pile started working for itself. Here's where it gets interesting. That process is very, very slow at the beginning, almost insultingly slow. Imagine you invest $10,000 at a 7% annual return. That's roughly the long-term average of the stock market after inflation, which is a reasonable number to work with. In the first year, you make $700. Exciting? Not particularly. You could earn close to that in a decent savings account right now. Year 2, you've got $10,700. 7% of that is $749. So you made $49 more than the year before. That's the miracle of compound interest everyone is raving about. $49. Year 5, you've got $14,026. You're earning about $982 a year. Still not exactly thrilling. Year 10, $20,000. Earnings around $1,400 a year. Year 20, $38,600. Nearly 4 times your original investment. Now things are starting to feel different. Year 30, $76,000. 7.5 times your money without adding a single dollar. Year 40, $149,000, almost 15 times what you started with. This is what everyone is talking about. This is the miracle. But did you notice something? The first 10 years were almost boring. The first 20 years were respectable, but hardly breathtaking. The last 10 years, though, from year 30 to year 40, that single decade added more dollar value than the entire first 30 years combined. This is the most important thing you can understand about wealth accumulation. The growth isn't linear, it's exponential, which means it looks like nothing for a very long time, and then it looks like everything. And that's exactly why people give up too early. So if time is the engine of compound growth, then starting late is a death sentence, right? Not quite. Here's where the math gets genuinely counterintuitive. There's a famous illustration that gets shared constantly in personal finance circles. Person A starts investing at 22, puts in $200 a month for 10 years, then stops entirely, never adds another dollar. Person B starts at 32, puts in $200 a month and never stops, not for 10 years, for the next 30 years. At age 62, Person A, who invested for just 10 years and then quit, has more money than Person B, who invested for 3 times as long. The numbers actually work out that way. Person A invested $24,000 total. Person B invested $72,000, and Person A still wins because those first 10 years of compounding had more time to run. This is the version of the story the finance industry loves, and they're not wrong. Time is genuinely powerful. Starting early is genuinely better. But here's what they don't tell you after the slide presentation ends. Person B isn't ruined. Person B is actually fine, because Person B invested $72,000 over 30 years and still ends up with a substantial nest egg, just not quite as large as Person A's. The gap is real, but it is not catastrophic. And most importantly, the lesson isn't that starting late destroys you. The lesson is that starting at all changes the trajectory. The uncomfortable truth is that most financial content is designed to create urgency, to make you feel behind, because people who feel behind are anxious. Anxious people buy things, they sign up for services, they pay advisors, they make emotional decisions. Calm, informed investors are bad for business. Let's talk about the real villain in this story. It isn't starting late. It isn't debt, though debt is certainly a supporting villain. The real killer of wealth accumulation is something so mundane, so built into the structure of modern financial products that most people never even think to question it. Fees. Not the dramatic crash, not the market collapse, not the headline risk. Fees. Here's the math that the mutual fund industry would really prefer you skip past. You have $100,000 invested. Two funds, both returning 7% annually before fees. One charges you 1% per year in fees, the other charges you 0.1%. That difference, 0.9%, sounds like almost nothing, a rounding error. Over 30 years, the 1% fee fund turns your $100,000 into approximately $570,000. The 0.1% fund turns it into approximately $760,000. The gap is real, but it is not catastrophic. And most importantly, the lesson isn't that starting late destroys you. The lesson is that starting at all changes the trajectory. The uncomfortable truth is that most financial content is designed to create urgency, to make you feel behind, because people who feel behind are anxious. Anxious people buy things, they sign up for services, they pay advisors, they make emotional decisions. Calm, informed investors are bad for business. Let's take a step back. You've been told that saving money is good, and it is. It's better than spending everything you earn. But there's a quiet leak in the boat that the savings message conveniently leaves out: inflation. Not the kind of inflation that makes headlines when gas prices spike. The structural, constant, unavoidable erosion of purchasing power that has been happening every single year for virtually all of modern economic history. Over the last 100 years, the US dollar has lost roughly 97% of its purchasing power. The dollar you have today will buy meaningfully less in 10 years than it does right now. That is not a prediction. That is not fear-mongering. It is the stated goal of central bank policy. 2% inflation per year, more or less, is the target. 2% sounds harmless. It's less than the change in your coffee price, but 2% compounding, just like investment returns compounding, adds up. In 35 years, at 2% inflation, your dollar is worth about half of what it is today. In 50 years, it's worth about 37 cents. Your savings account, if it's earning 1% interest, is losing purchasing power every single year, quietly, without drama. Just a slow, sustained erosion that you can't see because the number in your account looks the same or even slightly bigger, while the value of what it can actually buy is shrinking. This is why saving money and building wealth are not the same thing. Saving is keeping score. Building wealth is making your money move faster than inflation can eat it. The vehicle matters. The account type matters. The allocation matters. A dollar sitting in checking is not a dollar doing anything productive. It is a dollar slowly becoming less. Here's something the spreadsheets don't capture. Humans are spectacularly bad at long-term thinking. Not because we're stupid, because we evolved in an environment where thinking 30 years ahead was irrelevant. Our ancestors needed to solve today's problems, the threat across the field, the drought this season, the tribe that was moving too close. We are running ancient software in a world that requires long-term thinking, and the financial industry knows this better than almost anyone. There is a concept called present bias. It means that we instinctively value things we can have now more than things we can have later, even when waiting is mathematically superior. Tell someone they can have $100 today or $150 in a year, and a surprising number of people will take the 100 now. The math says wait, the brain says give it to me. This is why automatic investing works better than manual investing, not because the returns are different, but because you take the decision out of the hands of the part of your brain that wants to spend it on something real and visible and immediate. And this is why market crashes are so psychologically devastating, even when the rational response is to do almost nothing. The market drops 20%, which is uncomfortable but historically very normal. The average investor doesn't just watch it drop, the average investor panics, sells, locks in the loss, and then watches the recovery happen without them, usually waiting until prices are already high again before buying back in. Research tracking investor behavior versus market returns has found consistently over essentially every meaningful time period that the average investor significantly underperforms the market, not because they picked bad investments, because they bought and sold at the wrong times, because they made human decisions inside a system that rewards machine-like patience. The enemy isn't the market. The enemy is you at 2 in the morning reading financial news, convinced that this time it's different. It's never actually different, but it always feels like it is.
Now for the part that makes people genuinely uncomfortable. There's a version of doing everything right that still fails, and it's more common than anyone wants to admit. Consider someone who starts investing at 25, builds a solid portfolio, makes smart decisions, keeps fees low, ignores the noise. By 50, they have a meaningful amount invested, let's say $400,000. They feel good. They should feel good. But then life interrupts. It always does. Medical emergency, parents who need care, a divorce, a layoff at 53 that takes 2 years to recover from. And suddenly that portfolio, which was supposed to compound quietly for another 15 years, gets raided, partially liquidated at the worst possible time, taxed in ways that weren't anticipated. $400,000 becomes $200,000. The remaining $200,000 has 15 years instead of 25 to grow, and the retirement they were planning for looks considerably different. The math of compound growth assumes continuity, uninterrupted time in the market, no withdrawals, no emergencies, no life. Life does not cooperate. This is why the conversation about wealth building cannot just be about investment returns. It has to include insurance, emergency funds, tax strategy, estate planning, the unsexy infrastructure that keeps the compound growth machine running when everything around it is on fire. The most sophisticated investment portfolio in the world is fragile if the person holding it has no financial buffer between their life and their long-term money. The emergency fund isn't a starting point you graduate from. It is a permanent structure, the foundation that makes everything else possible. Let's take a breath. We've talked about compound interest, fees, inflation, psychology, the infrastructure of resilience. Now let's talk about something that sits above all of it. The system was not designed for everyone to win. This is not a conspiracy theory. It's a structural observation. Compound interest is extraordinarily powerful, but it requires a starting point. You need something to compound. And for a very large percentage of the population, that starting point is genuinely difficult to establish. When you're earning near minimum wage, when student debt is consuming 20% of your take-home pay, when healthcare costs eat unpredictably into savings, the $200 a month that makes the math so compelling is simply not available. The people who benefit most from compound interest are the people who already have capital to deploy, which is why wealth inequality tends to increase over time in economies where capital returns outpace wage growth. This is not ideology, this is observation, and it's important context. It means that individual financial decisions exist inside a larger structural environment. The advice to invest earlier, to reduce fees, to stay the course is all genuinely useful. It's all mathematically true, but it operates more powerfully at some income levels than others. The 40-year-old earning $60,000 who finally gets serious about saving and investing is not playing the same game as the 25-year-old with a trust fund. Both can benefit from the same principles, but the margin for error is radically different. Understanding this doesn't make the advice less valid, it makes the advice more honest.
If time is the engine, if fees are the leak, if psychology is the saboteur, if life is the wild card, then what is the actual lever? What's the thing that makes the biggest difference for the most people? It's not the investment you pick. It's not the broker you use. It's not even your income, though income matters. It's the gap, the difference between what comes in and what goes out, the margin. Call it savings rate if you want the finance term, but really it's simpler than that. It's the slice of your life that doesn't get immediately consumed by the rest of your life. And here's what makes this actually interesting. Your income has a ceiling, at least in the short term, a salary cap. There's a limit to how many hours you can work, how many skills you can sell, how much the market will pay for what you offer right now. But your expenses have a floor, and the gap between ceiling and floor is where all of the math we've been talking about actually lives. A person earning $50,000 and saving 15% of it has more working capital for compound growth than a person earning $90,000 and saving 3%. This sounds obvious. It rarely changes behavior. Because spending is visible and immediate and social. A new car is something people see. A retirement account is invisible. The dopamine hit from buying something is real and immediate. The dopamine hit from a well-constructed index fund portfolio is theoretical and 30 years away. This is the tension that every person with a paycheck lives inside. And the resolution isn't discipline in the motivational sense, it's system design. Automating the transfer before you see the money. Restructuring expenses in ways that reduce the daily willpower cost of financial decisions. Not grinding harder, designing smarter. So, where does this leave us? If you started early, good, but don't confuse a good start with a guaranteed finish. The compounding requires you to stay in the game, to not raid the principal, to keep the fees low and the contributions consistent even when nothing feels like it's happening, especially then. If you started late, also fine, not ideal, but not fatal. The math is less forgiving, which means the other variables matter more. The gap has to be wider, the decisions have to be cleaner, the infrastructure has to be tighter. But the mechanism still works. The real question isn't whether you're behind. The real question is this: do you understand what you're actually doing when you put money somewhere? Do you know what it costs you to keep it there? Do you understand what inflation does to money that isn't moving? Do you know why you panic when the market drops? And do you have a structure that protects you from your own panic? Because here's the thing. The math of compound growth is not complicated. The concepts are not inaccessible. The information exists, and most of it is free. What's rare is the combination of understanding, patience, and structural discipline that allows the math to actually play out. Over 30 years, through recessions, through job losses, through the thousand seductions to spend what should compound. The financial industry monetizes the gap between understanding and behavior. It sells complexity where simplicity would serve. It sells urgency where patience is the only real answer. It sells expertise in a domain where most of the winning strategy requires almost no expertise at all. Buy broadly, keep costs low, stay the course, give it time, build a buffer. That's almost the whole thing. 5 sentences. The problem is that you can know those 5 things and still do none of them, because knowing is not the same as having a system. A feeling is not the same as a structure. Intention is not a portfolio. Here's where I'll leave you. In 1626, Peter Minuit purchased Manhattan from the Lenape people for 60 guilders worth of trade goods. Sometimes this gets referenced in compound interest discussions as a thought experiment. If those 60 guilders had been invested at a modest annual return and left to compound since 1626, what would they be worth today? Hundreds of trillions of dollars, more than the GDP of Earth. The joke being that the Lenape made the bad trade. But here's the thing. No one actually invests money and leaves it untouched for 400 years. No family dynasty persists that long without disruption. No institution, no government, no financial system survives intact across 4 centuries. The thought experiment is mathematically correct and practically meaningless because it strips out everything that makes money complicated. Wars, depressions, regime changes, inflation, death, taxes, all the human things that interrupt the elegant arc of the curve. Money doesn't grow in a vacuum. It grows in a life. And lives are messy, unpredictable, sometimes genuinely unfair. What you can control is narrower than most financial content suggests, but it is not nothing. Understanding the mechanism, really understanding it, changes how you make decisions, quiet decisions, daily ones, whether to automate or procrastinate, whether to panic or wait, whether to pay attention to fees that most people wave past on a sign-up screen. Those small decisions made consistently are the real compound interest, not just financial, cognitive. The accumulation of better understanding, better habits, better systems over time. You're not behind, but you might be running in the wrong direction. And the first step to changing course is understanding what direction you're actually going. That's worth thinking about.